2.4%. That's how much venture capital goes to women. 0.34% goes to Black women. Dr. Liz Clayborne knows these numbers intimately because she's been fundraising against them. Her story will change how you think about who gets capital and why. Women don't talk about money the way we should. Not honestly, not openly, and not with each other. But that's changing. I'm Syama Bunten, founder of Wealth Catalyst. And Getting Rich Together is where the conversation lives. Every week, a different woman, a different path, and a conversation that will change how you think about your own financial power. This community is growing and you belong in it. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave us a 5-star review so more women can find their way here. Now, let's get rich together. Today, I am here with the brilliant Dr. Liz Clayborne, whom I had the pleasure of meeting at our DC salon. Liz, you are just such an incredible human who is up to so many incredible things. For those of you who are tuning in today, Dr. Elizabeth Clayborne is an emergency physician and entrepreneur who turned a problem she saw in everyday life in the ER into a medical device company. She's the founder and CEO of NasaClip, a hands-free solution for nosebleeds that is now scaling across health systems. I am so impressed, Dr. Elizabeth Clayborne, by your journey, by who you are, and the woman who I had a very brief encounter with. And so today is my great pleasure to double click on this beautiful life of yours. Thank you so much for being here today on Getting Rich Together.
Thank you for having me. I would say that the feeling's mutual. I absolutely enjoyed the, salon experience in DC, and there were so many powerful women there. And you just curate such a wonderful environment for important things to be shared and important things to be amplified. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's dive right in. So before you were a startup founder and traveling around the country and taking big important meetings and being a physician, you were obviously once a little girl. And so I'd love to start from the beginning. Talk to me. What was life like between the ages of 7, 12 years old? Where did you grow up? What was family life like? And what was money like?
Yeah, I love that you start origin stories there because I think it's such an important part of, the origin route. So I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. I am the eldest of 4 girls, which I would say definitely plays into a lot of my personality. So I'm definitely the true eldest child personality, like pretty type A bit overachieving in school, did a number of sports. My parents had an interracial marriage. I was born in 1983. And I remember this distinctly because when Jungle Fever came out, they did a documentary on our family. My mom is white, my dad is Black. And I just remember this because they wanted to get a shot of my mom doing our hair on the front porch because there's like this stereotype that white women wouldn't know how to do their Black children's hair. And to be honest, at the time, Denver was actually one of the highest percentage of interracial couples in the country, I think second to Seattle. And so I didn't ever really notice the fact that I was this biracial kid. I was definitely not the only one in my school that was biracial. But when I traveled around the country, it was very clear to me that not everywhere was like the place that I grew up in. But I would say I had a really amazing childhood. I have 3 younger sisters who I'm all very close to. And, growing up, one of the things that I think really set me up to be what I am now is I had parents who just did not set limits on what I believed I thought I could do. Like they really made me feel like I could achieve and do anything that I was interested in. And they encouraged that and also built around opportunities to do that. I would say that we were lower middle class. We all slept in the same room, for example, in our first house. So we had bunk beds with a trundle that pulled out. And then my baby sister was in a crib in the corner. And I never thought that was a big deal until maybe I would go to some friends' houses and be like, oh, this is nice. And you guys don't all share clothes and have hand-me-downs and go to consignment sales. But to me, it just never felt like lack. And it's so funny when you think back on it, because there's certain things now that I look back on, I was like, oh, my parents were kind of struggling during this period. During the summer, used to go to the school and get hot lunches, which meant that my mom was getting services at that time. But we thought it was just cool that during the summer, we got to go see the lunch ladies and get lunch. in the summertime and like play on the playground. And I never thought that it came from this place of lack. I was public school educated, which I'm just very proud of because like I went on to go to Duke University and become a physician. And it's one of the reasons that I'm like really pro public school education for my children now, because I think outside of, my mom being able to participate and was probably a pretty strong public school system, but still public, it just gave me the exposure to all walks of human life that I think was necessary for me to be the type of physician and human being that I am today.
It's amazing. So spill the tea, Liz. What kind of high school student were you?
So I would actually say I was like the jock nerd, I guess, because I did international baccalaureate program for those that know it. So this is like the IB program is like all honors classes. I was probably like, I went to a high school that was 70% Black, but I was maybe one of like 5 people in my graduating IB class. So it's very weird to be in a high school hallway with like a whole bunch of diversity and then walk into a class where it's like mostly white kids. Like that was just an interesting dynamic. So very academically focused, but I swam in high school and I was the first person to play on our all male football team. I was a kicker on a 5A football team. And it was because I played soccer. I was a midfielder and I could score from midfield and I had a leg. And in Colorado, where I grew up, the male soccer season is during the fall and the female soccer season is during the spring. So they could never get any male soccer players to like give up their soccer season to kick. But they knew I was like off season and they're like, we heard you have a leg. Would you like to be a place kicker? And I knew nothing about it. And I would say that was a very formative experience for me because you could imagine what I experienced like going into the male locker room to like look at some of the film or get taped up. And I mean, no one was naked, by the way, but I was like seeped in an environment surrounded by all high school boys who cannot like keep it together when, they're still going to talk their talk, right? Whether I'm there or not. But it was just so fascinating for me to play on an all male team and see the difference between an all female team. And it just taught me so much more about the male psyche and made me so comfortable being in that environment. I think it's one of the reasons why I also just never had an issue taking a risk or being in a male dominated industry and thinking that I'm any less than. And I love hanging out with guys. And on top of that, like I love football. I know more about it than most people. By the way, I have a long of 47, consistent in the 30s, and I am a diehard Broncos fan.
Liz, it's so funny. We have so many similarities and so many differences where I'm like, oh shit, like you did what? I also was born in 1983 with biracial. My mom is Indian, my father is white, and also went to an IB school.
That's
like, so funny.
Theory of knowledge. Did you do a theory of knowledge? Remember theory of knowledge? We had to do like a thesis.
I love theory of knowledge. Oh my God.
I did my thesis on anatomic modern human development, which is basically like why human beings look different. Because I'm biracial. I wanted to know like why phenotypically do we look different? And I tell people this, and this is why I'm a nerd, because I'm like, who does that in high school? But I was like, I could tell you, like, not just with skin color, because everyone knows about skin color, but like, I could tell you why Black girls have big butts, why Asian individuals have single epicanthal folds, which is like, the Asian eye. And it's because everyone is perfectly designed for the environment that their ancestors were in, right? And so, like a lot of people, and I know we're on a tangent, but just because I think that it's so, like, to me, it's just really interesting when you're thirsty for knowledge in this way, it just sets up your like understanding of the world differently. And I think when you share that, like, there's just so much more acceptance that could happen, especially when it comes to race. But for a lot of people know that skin color, melanin is like related to like maybe where your ancestors came from in relation to the equator. So a lot of people coming out of Africa and have dark skin because it's protected for the, from the sun. But as far as other features like noses, right? The purpose of the nose is to heat and humidify air. And so if you're in a hot, moist environment, your nose is open and broad. But as you migrate north, the air gets cooler and drier. You're going to have narrowing of the nasal shaft. And that way it has more contact with the nasal mucosa and more time to heat up before it enters the lungs. I wish they would just teach things like that, right? That would make it simple. Like that's why you have long pointy noses and you have broad noses, or the big girl butt thing, just because I know everyone's going to be like, but she told us she was going to tell us why Black girls have big butts. All women need 30% body fat to carry children in general. And that fat can be anywhere. If you're in a cooler climate, it's just going to be spread in your subcutaneous fat layer because it helps to insulate you. So you're not going to have it, concentrated in one area. But if you're in a hot humid climate, you want to concentrate the fat, and the best way to concentrate it, or best place to concentrate, is the butt, because it's lower than the hips and it doesn't offset the balance of the person. So they say that it inherently became attractive to men in that region because it represented women who could be healthy and carry their children. So that's one of the cute, interesting things I learned in high school, being a nerd in the IB program.
That is so amazing. I love that so much. Those like holy bananas. Okay. So did you know when you were on the field and I mean, it's so incredible to hear about how you're the only girl on this team and you are like, developing this level of comfort that I think most women never get the opportunity to sort of experience at such a young age. When did you decide that medicine was your calling? How did that sort of come to pass? Was it high school? Was it like an early thing when you were 7 and you're like, I want to be this when I grow up? Like, where did that through line come from?
It's interesting because I don't think I was really super gung-ho about medicine until I got into college. My mom is a nurse, so I was always interested adjacent to medicine. And she actually did nurture that interest, because I remember she used to take me to the clinics with her and introduce me to her physician friends and let me shadow. But I loved the show ER that was out when we were younger. And it never occurred to me that I was going to grow up and be an ER doctor. Like, it wasn't until I really got into college. And what's interesting is that I liked it, but if I'm really honest, I chose it in college because it seemed like it was the hardest, most respected profession to pursue.
You're such a badass, Liz.
And it seemed interesting. But like, I ended up doing a non-science major. So you'll learn a lot more about that. And I think that's also why I ended up being ultimately an entrepreneur. So I went from doing like biomedical engineering in college to designing my own major in medical ethics and religion.
Oh my
God.
God.
I had this very unique, like, non-science background as a pre-med, and that it was strategic. Like, I decided to do that even though I knew I was going to medical school.
Where did you get this sort of self-directedness that you really approach your life? Like, it really seems like there's a tremendous amount of clarity, vision, as a very young woman, it seems like you have a plan. Like, where do you sort of feel like that came from? And how did you start to think about exercising that in your university years?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at some of the non-traditional things I did really young, like playing football, I learned early on that like when you take a risk and you do something different, it is rewarding. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you get to experience and accomplish things that you would not otherwise if you were too scared to do that thing. Like, not everyone's going to say, yeah, I'll play on the all-male football team. And even in college, not everyone's going to be like, oh, I don't know if I want to be a traditional, pre-med student and do a science major. I'm going to try to like design my own major and kind of look at these different courses. And every time I did it, it showed me that it was worth it. Like, wow. Very worth it. And I think then if you look at the background of my parents, who always were supporting what I wanted to do, right? Like, I think fortunately, I certainly had parents who I think wanted me to do well, but my parents were more the ones like, you need to calm down. Like, you're doing a lot. My mom, even today, is like, are you taking care of yourself? Like, are you resting? They were more like just wanting to make sure that I was happy. But I come from an accomplished family, so I also know a lot about my genealogy. So my dad is African American, but we know the plantation that our Black ancestors were emancipated from in Whittiers, North Carolina. And I know my great-great-grandfather, who fought in the Civil War and took his 8-year-old son when she was emancipated to Gosport, Indiana, where we still have a farm, and have built over 600 acres that our family owned at one time there, that every generation from that 8-year-old who then got married went to college, one generation out of slavery, which is fun. I mean, like, this is like in the 1920s. Like, do you know what the high school graduation rate was in the 1920s? The high school graduation, probably about 30%. The college graduation rate was like 6%, Black or white. So to be college educated in the 1920s is unheard of. And for a family to have multiple people that went to college, and even the women, like my great Aunt Frances, who's like my ancestor that I know that I remember the most because she died at 96, she went to high school. She rode horseback to her high school and graduated from high school. And so, like, there's just a lot of pride and a lot of education. Like my grandfather, my dad's dad, had a PhD in education from IU. So there was always respect for education, but never, I think, a sense that you could not do something that you wanted to do. And on my mom's side, they're Irish mostly, came over here from Ireland during the potato famine. My great-great-grandmother on that side lied about her age to get through Ellis Island. She was only 14. You had to be 16 at the time to immigrate by yourself. So she lied and took that lie to her grave. We found out after she died, like, just people doing amazing things, right? Like a lot of people think that like what I'm doing is amazing, but like I think it's in my genes to a certain point to answer your question. And then I was nurtured by the right parents. And then I think I have, the ambition, the tenacity, the resilience, and the drive to just get it done for my life.
It's incredible. Did your parents ever talk to you about money? Like, did they ever have conversations with you about spending it or about sort of how to think about it? Obviously, as you were getting ready for university, like, were there conversations around? And then you went on to obviously get your medical degree, right? And obviously, when people start to move it in advance, obviously into getting those higher education degrees, it gets much more expensive. So how did you start to think about, paying for university? What were some of those conversations like at home?
Yeah, I mean, so I had probably two different types of parents. I had my dad, who was the very, very, and still is to this day, fiscally conservative engineer. So like he is a penny pincher and doesn't spend money on anything and is always encouraging us to save and to prepare. And, really did make sure that he was able to provide for, a family of 4 children and his wife. My mom worked part-time. She was a nurse, but she was much more kind of like what I would say I am, which is like, I'll just make more money if I want to spend more money. Like I'm going to figure out how to get more money if I want to do that thing. So it was a nice balance with the two of them, but I definitely understood that I was going to have to pay for college. Like my parents were able to very minimally contribute. I think all of us got $15,000. If you want to be specific, I know exactly what it is because my dad is very like everyone's getting the same thing. So all 4 of us got $15,000, which was not going to do anything. I went to Duke University for undergrad. So I went to a very expensive undergraduate private university, but I got academic scholarships and I had some financial aid and I worked, which I did not know was going to be such a unique thing. Like I read some article recently that was like, talking about the Duke culture and that like there were people who just never knew where the financial office was. And for me, having to have a job and getting financial assistance for college was just what I always knew I was going to do, but I didn't necessarily think it was, a weakness. And in my opinion, I'm like, look, I got here public school educated. I didn't have, a private school education and a lot of people trying to like vie to get me into this school. So to me, it just solidified that I deserved to be there.
Hell yeah. Yeah, you did it. That is so amazing. Okay. So take me through sort of as you are, graduating with your medical degree and you're starting to think about launching yourself into the world, sort of those first stages of when you're thinking about building, building a financial life for yourself, building a life, being on your own, having to sort of take care of things. What was some of your early experiences, being now out of the house, out of schooling and being launched into the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you go through medical school, it's a little bit different because you're like sheltered in that kind of college state for a much longer period of time where it's not real life. So I graduated from Duke in 2005 and I actually did 2 years research fellowship at NIH, which I thought was really interesting. It's also what made me fall in love with the DC area and with policy. And I had done this non-traditional major and I actually did research on race, ethnicity, and genetics, which was really looking at race-based therapeutics and the way that we look at race as some kind of indicator that we think has a genetic component, but it's a social construct, right? So how do we meld that? Like what am I defined as a, black and white kid genetically? Like, what does that mean for my risk and the medications I take? So I really liked all that and it blended all the
I'm
things.
really happy I know you, Liz. Like, you know so much stuff. I'm like, this is amazing. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So, but like, I also like, this was in 2005. I feel like my stipend from NIH was $21,000. Like I lived in DuPont Circle, I had 2 roommates. I'll never forget this. I had 2 roommates, but we lived in like a nice apartment. And I thought I was rolling at that time. Like I got so much money with my $20,000. I mean, I didn't have a car or anything like that. I took the metro everywhere, but like, I made it work and I had a job. And I used that time to kind of really make sure I wanted to go to medical school. And then also I decided then to go to medical school at Case Western because I did a dual degree and got my master's in bioethics while I was in medical school. So I really like married that interest I had from undergrad of doing a medical ethics and religion course, which to me is like really comes from this idea that like our secular Western society likes to separate religion and spirituality from medicine. But historically and culturally, most people have medicine men or medicine women. Like it is a spiritual experience when you're sick. Like it really will bring you to your knees. And it's a misnomer to me that like you look at a human being as just they're a disease entity. So I always was like more fascinated about looking at the whole picture. And the way I balanced that with my medical education is like, while I was getting my MD, I got this master's in bioethics. And because I got it done in 4 years, it was free. And so I definitely was always like looking for ways to save money because I knew that I didn't have, anyone supporting me at that time besides myself. And for medical school, you just go into debt. That's what you do. That's what they, some people might have parents that paid for medical school. I fully funded my medical education, which is one of the reasons why for the master's program, I knew I really want to try to get it done in the 4 years so I wouldn't have additional debt. But, even when I talk to pre-med students now, like, you are kind of told you will be able to make enough money that you'll pay off this debt. And it's just a necessary evil. Now, from a structural position, I think the way we do medical education in this country is backwards. I think it sets us up to have too many subspecialists and money hungry physicians when they come out. They literally take the most bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, optimistic group of students and just pervert them into pessimistic, burnt out, residents who then they work to the bone. And in many ways, I think it corrupts like all the things that attract people to medicine. I think countries where medical education is free, they get a little more balanced participation in different specialties, especially primary care, where you need to have a lot of smart minds. So that's my personal opinion as someone who has a bioethics master's and an MD on the back end. But at the time, I felt like I was more kind of still living in that college life where it's like, of course, I don't have a lot of money, but I'm not in lack. And I knew where I was going to live. And so I wouldn't say that stage of like real world money came until I was a resident. And the problem with residency is like, you're really poor because you're still not really getting real medicine, like real paychecks. Honestly, if they look at what we're paid hourly, we might make less than minimum wage because they work us a lot. And I went into emergency medicine. So that was 4 years of residency that I was in emergency medicine and, living in DC. They do for residency change your salary based on where you're living. But like a lot of times, it's pretty tight. Like people who have families in residency, I don't really know how that works because you definitely are not paid enough to support, anyone besides yourself. But people made it work. So I never felt like it felt real to me until I was literally an attending. And by the time you're an attending, now you just jumped to this huge income bracket. So
what was that like? Like, what is it like to go from, oh my gosh, I have all this debt. They're telling me it's going to get paid off, but like, I don't, I still need to see the proof is in the pudding. And by this point, it sounds like when you become an attending, you are now how many years into the space? I mean, you've now
4 years of college, 4 years of residency, and then you graduate and you're a new attending and you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you probably have now it's probably more like $400,000 of debt. Like I had about 250 of debt, about almost 300 if I'm looking at the 50 I carried from undergrad. And so that's a lot of debt. So one of the things I did is I got a job though in a hospital that helps pay down the debt where you work in an underserved neighborhood. There are federal programs for paying down the debt. So I knew I was going to need to do that to offset my debt. But I picked a place that I would have worked probably regardless. So it didn't seem like that big a deal for me. And I was able to achieve some loan forgiveness that really helped. But paying those loans is really, it hurt, right? Because it's like you work so hard and then you finally have this money, but you still feel like you're always on a budget because you can't really fully exercise that income because so much of it is going to paying your debt. And then by this time I was also getting married and having a kid and trying to have a house and all the things as a woman that you feel like you really delayed when you go into a career in medicine because you had been so focused on achieving those things. And it's scary because a lot of us feel like we're behind at that point because we're a lot older than maybe some of our peers who have done different professions.
Wow, it's so interesting to me because I always, I've heard young people say, I want to be a doctor because they make lots of money. And then I feel like
don't do it for money. First of all, I believe if they did an analysis that it looks at your lifetime earning potential, and we don't really make that much money over our lifetime because it's all backlog, right? Like you're literally slave labor for like the first several years of your profession. And then you're paying off your debt for like another 5 to 10 years. And then finally, you're probably in the clear. Now, that's not to say you can't do it. And I mean, there's certain specialties that do very, very well. And if you're smart, there's a lot of physicians now that are really focused on like making sure that you make smart decisions. Because to your point, Syama, like a lot of us just did not get good training on how to manage our money. It's almost like athletes that get paid a lot of money and then blow it and don't know how to build wealth. I would say medicine is similar. Like we're so smart in some ways, but financially, I found that didn't really exist. A lot of the insights I have into managing money came after I founded the business and I was like learning how to run a business.
Well, in these early stages of getting married, establishing a family, what were some of the money, if at all, conversations that you guys were having at home? It sounds like with this, like on your end, there's this, internal change, right? Of like money coming in, paying things down, getting reestablished. What were some of these early conversations like as you were thinking about building a life together?
Mm-hmm. So I think that, you immediately are in like a very different income bracket, usually a top 5 to 10% income bracket being a physician. But you are very aware of the debt you have. And then you have a lot of very expensive things you're probably trying to do in a short period of time, which is like buy a house and have kids. and for some people, I fortunately didn't have this experience. They struggle, right, with having kids. So there's the whole IVF thing that goes in that was not supported, when I was coming out. And I think that was actually a very real financial strain for a lot of my friends that were in that position. But for me, I think that, at the time that I was getting married, and I say this because we are both aware that we're divorced, and we talked about the ups and downs. And to be honest, like to me, the power and the lessons of going through a divorce. I married someone who did not make as much money as me. And I think that created a lot of struggles. In many ways, it created struggles in the dynamic of the relationship, but also in the pressure that I had as like the primary breadwinner, the person that was going to have to really plan for all these big things with family and with kids. I'm not saying it's always like that. I think some people marry people who are not making as much money and they still are just very supportive and they make those joint decisions. But in my particular experience, I feel like I had to be very conscious of like those decisions. But I think that to me, I was kicking the bucket down the ball down the street a little bit because I was like, well, I'll make that money. Like I can catch up. In that first 5 years, you're just like, I can make this up. I can make this up. And really what you're focused on is getting out of the debt so that you have no more student loans, and then you can start like stacking. And they have some instruments that help physicians, like especially with mortgages, there's like physician loans for houses because they know our earning potential and our ability to like buy homes. And so I think that I utilized those tools in order to kind of get the things I needed to have kids. And so I think you have to be mindful, but by no means that I feel like I was uncomfortable. Like compared to how I grew up, and I still say this now, like my kids are so spoiled. Like, you know what I mean? My two little ones, like they have no idea. They have way too many stamps on their passports. Like they think it is normal. Yeah, I think we were going somewhere to like a local, like not local, but a domestic destination, like to Houston for a wedding. And my daughter's like skipping down the jet bridge and saying, "Mommy, what beach are we going to?" And I'm like, we're not going to a beach today, Lita. We're going to a wedding in Houston. And the lady in front of us is like, I love that your daughter identifies and associates walking down a jet bridge with going to a, and I was like, well, I might have had something to do with that.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
While I was mindful of, paying off my loans, I was still like definitely enjoying my life during that early stand period. And then to me, the rubber didn't hit the road until I divorced. Like then all of the financial things became really, really difficult because, divorce is expensive. In my particular case, the selling of our marital home was extraordinarily difficult because it's like right after the interest rates went up and a lot of things. And so that it just financially drained me in a way that I just never anticipated. It was a huge, change in my plans and very financially stressful, and still something that I think I'm building out of because in addition to going through a divorce, I decided to found the company. Like during this time, right after I had been pregnant on the front lines of COVID with my now 5-year-old.
I mean, Liz, I was just going to say, like, it's like right when you're getting yourself out of this, like get myself out of student loan debt, establish myself. Now it's like, let me now do something very risky, up until starting the business, and even divorce is risky, everything else before that seems very thought out. There's a plan, here's the strategy. You throw a divorce in there and it's risky because you just have no idea what's going to happen on the other side. You have no idea who you were married to until you go through a divorce. You have no idea what like personal risk and money and sort of what these things look like. And then certainly when you start a business, my gosh, like there's another huge component of risk, but also possibility. But these two things happening is so much to handle. How did you prepare yourself for either of these things? And how did you sort of think about, I don't know, what it looked like to be jumping off of a cliff, right? After you had sort of been so deliberate and thoughtful about the progression of your career.
Right? Yeah. And I'm very I'm a Taurus. So the security is an important thing for me. It was very uncomfortable. Well, you've heard a little bit of this story, but 2020 was such a pivotal year for me. So I know 2020 was really hard for a lot of people with the pandemic, but I was a full-time ER physician and I was about 4 months pregnant. No, I was 6 months pregnant because I delivered in May. So I was 6 months pregnant when the pandemic hit in March of 2020. And I worked at the hardest hit hospital in the state of Maryland, intubating people in the parking lot. I mean, it was extraordinarily terrifying. There were 2 other pregnant women in my group. So if all of us had left, our group would have been in major, trouble because of how much volume we were dealing with. But my OB was this is super risky. We have no idea what the risk is to the baby. And honestly, if I knew what I knew now, it was very risky. I mean, I'm just so fortunate that my daughter was born without any issues. But I, right before this, had found out about infidelity in my marriage. And I was just in the worst personal position you could imagine. At the time where I needed the most support physically, emotionally, financially, I literally just had everything really taken from me. So I was working front lines. I was not getting the support I needed at home. And then because of the pandemic, I couldn't even really get my family around me. Right. So then I delivered my daughter in May of 2020. May 30th, 2020, she was healthy, it was fine. Go home, and I decided during my maternity leave to do an accelerator program for NasaClip, my device. And one of the reasons
nobody ever, nobody says and I'm going to go start a company while I'm breastfeeding and
So the reason I decided to do it is back in 2015 when I was a resident, and just to tell a little bit about the company, because I always got to plug as a founder. So when I was a resident, I found out that we see about 500,000 ER visits a year for nosebleeds. And I just couldn't believe that many people came to the ER for nosebleeds. I'm like, why are you here for your nosebleed? Just put pressure on your nose. But when I looked at the problem more carefully, I was patients mismanage nosebleeds. They almost do the opposite of what they're supposed to do. So they'll put their head backwards. Your head is actually supposed to be forwards. Patients will pinch on their nasal bridge. You're actually supposed to pinch over the flare of your nostril.
Wait, so where did that misinformation come from? That you're supposed to tilt your head back?
I see in movies still, people coming in with their head tilted back and tissue lightly stuffed in their nose. You need constant 10 to 20 minutes of constant uninterrupted pressure over the flare of your nostril, without letting go, to stop a nosebleed, which sounds simple, but that's actually hard to do. Nobody pinches their nose and doesn't let go for 10 minutes. So I think they panic because they're doing the wrong things, and they'll come to the ER. We see 500,000 of these visits, and they think they're going to be seen right away. And I'm like, this is not a gunshot wound or heart attack or a stroke. So, you have to wait. And it was just frustrating for everyone involved. And I was trained to take 2 tongue depressors and tape them together to make a clip. And I'm like, there's not a device for this. I'm like, these patients don't even need to be here. So the idea came to me as a resident that I could create a hands-free, adjustable external nasal compression device, which is NasaClip. You can check it out at nasaclip.com, NasaClip. We have adult and pediatric versions of the device, and it's basically like the Band-Aid of nosebleeds. It has these soft medical grade sponges that go in the nose. You can add a vasoconstrictive agent to Afrin spray, and then it holds external pressure, and then you take it off after 10 to 20 minutes, and the sponges are replaceable. So at the time in 2015, when I was back at a resident, it was an idea in my head, but then we were going through all these things, right? I was getting married and I was having a kid and I was trying to buy a house, and then all this happening. This was just on the back burner, but I did get my patents done. And then in 2020, I heard about an accelerator program, but they wanted you to be full time to be an accelerator program, because back in the day, accelerator programs expect you to be some trust fund white boy that had nothing better to do than do an accelerator program, because by no means are they going to be working or having children at the same time, starting out a company. Now, to the credit of this accelerator program, they changed their rules after I gave them feedback, and that is no longer a requirement. But for me, it was. So the only time I could do this accelerator program was during my maternity leave. after COVID. And because it was COVID, it was a virtual event. So I breastfed my newborn infant through this accelerator program. And I think that it was just like, I just decided I'm going to do this. Like everything else was really challenging at that time, right? Like I was physically just, devastated from like all the things I had been through with COVID, emotionally going through it at home with what looked like was going to be a divorce at that point, the start of it. And I had by the way, I had an 18-month-old at home, or 19-month-olds. They're 19 years apart. So I had a toddler at home that I was taking care of. And then I decided that like I needed to take this risk on myself because I just believed that this device could do really well. And I didn't know when else it was going to happen. And at that point, I was just living like month to month because the whole picture of like where my life was going to go that was so planned out before kind of evaporated when I saw the beginnings of this like divorce and everything else going on. And, maybe I went back to my roots of like, I'm going to double down on me and I'm going to bet on me. And so I did the decision. I got 50,000 of capital and some executive management support. And from there, I was able to raise my first million. And now we've raised over 4.5. We've been on market for more than 2 years. We're on Amazon.com. We're in probably 300 doors nationally. And, I think this is going to be the Band-Aid of Nosebleeds. And I believe that I tell the story a lot of times with all the personal flavor to it, because I want people to understand that it came from like me really driving out of one of the most challenging years of my life. And I took a lot of financial risks because not only did I go on to end up being divorced like 2 years after that. So it was like a long process because it was COVID. So we didn't do it right away. We tried for a while and it did not work, but ultimately divorced. I had to take a very significant pay cut to run the company, which I'm still doing, right? I still feel like I'm taking a lot of financial risk personally because I don't make as much. I can't pay myself, right, at this early stage like I did as a clinician. And I'm investing heavily my own assets, in money into the company and constantly fundraising. But to me, in addition to the NasaClip device, we have pipeline technology now that I've thought of where we're going to use NasaClip as an intranasal drug delivery platform. So a better way to deliver intranasal drugs like Narcan or naloxone, the opioid reversal agent. So instead of spraying it up the nose, it can go on the sponges, which maintain contact with the nasal mucosa, and you put the system under pressure, making it more likely it would be effective in one application. And that opens up a $43 billion intranasal drug delivery market. And like, I just believe I will be able to for this company. Like, I think it's going to happen. And I think that I'm already seeing the fruits of my labor because I shared a story with you that I have now a 5-year-old. So my 5-year-old, the Corona baby, is a redhead from the Irish grandma, and she gets nosebleeds all the time because redheads tend to get nosebleeds more often. And so she's like my best little NasaClip model. If you go to our social media at nasaclip.com, or you can follow me at Dr. Ela's PC, you'll see her on there because she gives me the best natural content of like putting on her NasaClip. Like they see me as this physician, this founder, this CEO, this person who's on TV a lot. Because I didn't mention to you that during the pandemic, I was also on national TV like every week because they liked the story of the pregnant frontline provider. And as you can tell, I have a knack for like live television interviews. And it was so important for me at that time because I don't think people really understood what's going on. All of those things in 2020 like primed me to be ready for being this founder, right? The resilience, the pivoting, the innovation, the speaking and the belief in myself, right? That is why I was able to successfully raise. And a lot of that came from this unforeseen experience of having national television, opportunities as a physician and going through this pandemic as a pregnant mom. And now I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And my 7-year-old maybe a year ago asked me a question that I think is just so powerful and so reflective of this whole story. And she said, "Mommy, can boys be doctors?" And she was genuinely curious if like it's possible for them to be doctors. Because in her reality, right? In her reality, this is a girl job, right? Like I'm a physician. I have a lot of female friends that are physicians. Her pediatrician happens to be a woman. And so she kind of just assumed it's a girl job. Like for her, not only is that a girl job, but being a CEO is a girl job. Being on TV girl job. And that's her starting point. And I just love that because if you look all the way back, right, at my whole history and my ancestors, like I just can't imagine how amazing it would be for them to believe that their future great, 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 great granddaughter would think that boys can't be doctors. My
That's
friends
so
told me
amazing, Liz.
they were like, you should have told her if they work really, really hard and they know the right people, maybe.
So as you're, obviously building business, you're still, you're working, you're juggling so many hats, a single mom, there are so many things you're up to. And as you're starting to think about laying down the, ultimate, once again, sort of foundations, right? Like the foundation for your future, for your kids, what are things going to start to look like? Having, a startup with great traction is incredible because obviously that's a great way to sort of create generational wealth is, get that business going and really sort of see that as one potential channel. And then obviously, as you're thinking about these other ways of sort of building, I'm sure, and I'd love to hear more about this, but your exposure now to venture capital, which is something that most of us don't get a lot of exposure to unless you are a founder or an investor. How do you sort of start to think about contexting things? So what are you sort of thinking about as in your exposure levels and what you've been learning? Like, how do you see your pie today? Like, how are you planning for the future? And what are some of the thought processes that you walk through?
Yeah, I mean, I just am so grateful for the experience because I had absolutely no business background. As you heard, I was like a, medical ethics and religion, major and pre-med. There was no business in any of that. So a lot of my business know-how was like self-taught and, trial by fire. I did a lot of very excellent accelerator programs, including Springboard, that's for women. I did a Blue Cross Blue Shield accelerator. I did NSF Core. So I really, I'm a sponge for knowledge. And I think that I was able, unlike the stereotype of physician founders, like I know what I don't know. And so I was really able to like take that on and learn that. And it was the first thing that was baffling to me and getting into like the startup and venture capital world was learning about the dearth of funding that goes to women, right? The 2.4% of venture capital going to women, 0.34% of that going to Black women, which was just astonishing for me, even coming from the, still heavily male dominated industry of medicine, which is very much changing now. I was blown away by that discrepancy, especially after I learned that female founded teams tend to be faster to revenue, faster to profitability, have 6x greater returns. Like in general, if venture capitalists were about their dollar, right? About their paper, their money, as they say they are, they would probably only invest in women, right? Like if you look at the statistics. So obviously there is something else going on that's not allowing the capital to flow in that direction. And in my opinion, it's an unconscious bias. Most venture capitalists are white men. It's an area where they're very highly risk adverse because it's high risk investment. And so they're going to invest in what they feel comfortable with and what they know. And so that's usually other white men. And so I think the only way to change that, in addition to being a stellar founder, which by the way, I have an open round for whoever's interested. I have seed raise that we're finishing up, about 400,000 left in that. And then I'll have additional fundraising. And so I'm open to anyone who would like to get on the NasaClip bandwagon. But in addition to being a really outstanding founder, I think we have to also change who is investing and have more women and more people of color in the pool of people who are investing. And to a lot of what you talk about, Syama, I think that a lot of women just don't have any idea about the opportunity to do angel investment or be involved in, venture capital or this world. Even for me as a physician, I feel like we are not well taught, as I mentioned, about any financial discipline or how to plan for the future. Like most physicians I know, they have their 401k and maybe they'll buy a vacation home or a rental home. And that's it. Like real estate and there's things. There's nothing about like how you diversify your portfolio, how you can invest in something that you really believe in. But for my early rounds, my pre-seed rounds, I went to a lot of my physician colleagues and had them write $5,000 to $1,000 checks. But I had to educate them about like what it meant, what is the risk, what's the pay, what's the time frame, and no one knew that. And so I think that for me now, a lot of my drive is, not just to introduce what I think is a simple but elegant solution to nosebleed emergencies, but to really serve as that model of like what can happen when Black women and women have early access to capital and what can be brought to the market and how it can change other people's lives. Because, me having $1 billion exit in addition to it being a really powerful story is then going to position me to invest in other women and people of color. And that's really what I'm driving towards. And that's the legacy that I want to be able to provide my girls and everyone that comes after me and is in my community.
I love that. That was going to be my next question, which is, as you know, because you are a physician, it feels like we are living and have the potential to live so much longer now than anyone before us. It sounds like everywhere I look, there's longevity conversations. Everyone's trying to get to 120. My question for you, Liz, was going to be around, looking back on a life well lived. Let's say at a young age of, 110. What is that legacy? Obviously, it sounds like generational wealth to help propel a more equitable future for women and women of color who are building. But what else does that legacy look like for you? What is that body of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I want to teach my daughters more than anything is to live a life full of happiness. And I think if more people dialed in on what is like their true authentic nature, what they're, really passionate about, you'll hear that you're able to kind of somehow maneuver into making money doing that thing. And very traditionally in society, I think we've been driven to have respect for our productivity, and we're valued on like what we produce, whether it's attached to something that we're passionate about or we like or not. Obviously, I am still, type A at heart, and I want my girls to do really well in school. But more than that, like I want them to grow up and be able to have a job that they absolutely love, that they would do for free. And it's all the more sweeter because they get paid to do it. Because I think then you're able to give from a fountain that's overflowing all the time, and not trying to kind of barely keep your cup full so that you can like extend to others. I think that we're required as women to make so many sacrifices as so many different parts of our life. And so for me personally, in addition to a legacy of that I think is powerful and resilient and inspirational, I want it to be one where I didn't just work hard, right? I don't want it to be that she worked hard. I want it to be like she lived a beautiful, happy life and was successful. Because I don't think it's always about your productivity and how much you do. Like capitalism is very attached to like input, like you put in this work and you get this out. But especially for women, and I have an executive coach that gave me a really powerful example of this. When you look at a pregnant woman early in her pregnancy, it doesn't look like she's doing any work, does it? You can't see the work that she's doing. She's creating a human being. She's doing some of the most important work ever. So is it not valued because you don't see like what comes of it until the end? And then how do we equate what that time is versus the input? So to me, it's not always about like showing what you did, putting the hours in. And I also think that we need to change a little bit of the disease of busyness that we have in our society. Like a lot of the work I had to do that allowed me to balance is understanding that working harder does not make me smarter or better. Like in my opinion, if I could work less and do more, that's what makes me smarter. That's what makes it better. And so I'm always like striving for like, what can I do that gives me efficiency, but also allows me to have space for happiness and joy in my life. So like I'm making time right now to date, by the way. We talked about this a little bit because, it is still my plan to have a loving, fulfilling relationship. And like, that is part of like the life I want my girls to see. And I want them to be proud of me on the professional side, but it's almost more important for them to see me emotionally fulfilled with like a partner that I love. And so I got to make sure I'm dedicating time to that as well.
That's beautiful. I have two final questions for you, Liz. The first is, we've talked a lot about money, and we've talked about student loans. We've talked about investing, all these different components around money. You briefly alluded to it when you said that your daughter equates the jetway with beaches. But my question was going to be, what has been the most fabulous recent thing that you have spent your money on? Experiences, items, you name it. What's been the most fabulous?
I have it. You can't, so they're not going to be able to see it. So I'll show it to you. For Christmas this year, I bought myself a wedding ring.
Beautiful.
And it's a 3-stone ring. It has a white, pink, and yellow diamond. And I put it on my right hand. And it was like kind of like it was like a love gift to myself. Cause like, it's been really hard being a single parent. The dating thing is really, really hard for me right now. And I think I was putting so much pressure on myself. A lot of what I had to remind myself is that like to love myself and to pour into myself. And so I bought myself this ring, and because I wear it all the time, like a wedding ring, to me, it represents loving my mind, body, and soul. And I wanted it to be like a daily reminder. And honestly, it was not really something I could afford because they're real lab grown diamonds, but still a diamond ring. But like I'm really proud that I decided to do that for myself. And it's a daily reminder that really grounds me.
That's beautiful. And then our final question, what is it that we, the audience, can do for you? What are you calling in this year? What's on your heart? How can we support you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing that I've seen that supports me and the NasaClip journey is sharing my story. So if you were inspired by anything that I said, like tell others about it. Check out our website. If you have nosebleeds, if your kid gets nosebleeds, or you have an athlete that gets nosebleeds or older parent that gets nosebleeds, please check us out on Amazon. Leave us a review. Tell others. Tell your hospitals. Tell your healthcare workers. And then certainly for those who are in the position to invest, it is still definitely very much of a grind to fundraise, and I'm so close to punching through. I mean, our goal this year is to reach $1 million in revenue, but I need to be kind of capital flush to get there. And so if you're interested in reaching out to me, I'm on LinkedIn, Elizabeth Clayborne, Clayborne, or you can email me. I'm sure I can share my details that you guys can put in the show notes. But like sharing the story and just like mentioning that you heard of Dr. Liz and you heard of the NasaClip story, it spreads like wildfire. It really does have, a tremendous impact. And the other thing I'll say is, I always reach back. So if you want to ask me a question or you need advice or you like want to, talk to me about something I could help you with, I also welcome, that type of outreach because I'm bringing as many people with me as I can.
Amazing. Dr. Liz Clayborne, thank you so very much for your spirit of generosity today, for sharing your incredible story, your ancestry, your vision, the highs, the lows, and the money stories that have followed with you in this future you're creating. I'm so appreciative of who you are on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. This is the conversation we come back to every single week. Real women, real wealth, and what becomes possible when we stop being silent about money. If today's episode moved you, don't let it stop here. Wealth Catalyst is where women go to take it further. Our Freedom Tour salons are gathering women in 32 cities this year. Intimate evenings in homes and private spaces where women talk honestly about money, risk, and what they're building. And if you're ready to go even bigger, join us at the Wealth Catalyst Summit, a full-day event in San Francisco this October. Find your city and claim your seat at wealthcatalyst.com. We'll see you there.